127 million people. That is the almost unimaginable number of soldiers who fought in the Second World War, if you add together all the countries involved. With that many individual people, there were also some soldiers who achieved things that seemed completely impossible and who were more dangerous than entire companies. They were so notorious that to this day many of them are still known mainly by their nicknames, names like the Exterminator, Mad Jack, or Lady Death. And these are exactly the stories we are about to tell you. We begin with a man who went down in history as the White Death, Simo Häyhä. The Finns served in the Winter War between Finland and the Soviet Union between 1939 and 1940 for barely 100 days, and yet in that short time, he managed to become the most feared enemy of the Soviet Union. As a sniper, Simo Häyhä developed a tactic that allowed him to become almost completely invisible in the snow-covered winter landscape. Simo Häyhä buried himself in the snow, wearing white camouflage clothing, and then waited for hours in temperatures dropping as low as -40 degrees Celsius until enemies approached. He even packed snow into his mouth so that his breath would not be visible, rising into the air. Unlike regular snipers, the Finn completely avoided using a telescopic sight on his rifle and instead aimed only with simple open sights, meaning the rear sight and front sight. That way, he did not have to raise his head while aiming at the enemy, and no reflection from the glass of a scope could give away his position. The outstanding marksman then picked off Soviet soldiers one after another, without them even being able to tell where the shots were coming from. In total, in just 3.5 months, Simo Häyhä single-handedly eliminated at least 505 enemy soldiers, according to confirmed figures. Estimates, however, suggest that the White Death may actually have taken out as many as 800 enemies in that short period. In fact, Simo Häyhä was so feared that the Soviets eventually called in entire artillery strikes on the suspected position of this one single soldier. Toward the end of the war, Häyhä was in fact hit directly in the face by an enemy explosive round, which tore away half of his left jaw. But he survived and went on to live a peaceful life as a dog breeder until 2002. When asked in interviews what he felt back then after taking the lives of hundreds of people, the Finn simply answered, "The recoil." While Simo Häyhä was so dangerous because of his ice-cold tactics and calmness, John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill was the complete opposite. The British officer was feared by his enemies because he was wildly unpredictable. And he definitely did not get his nickname Mad Jack for no reason. In fact, the Brit went to war carrying a medieval longbow, a Scottish broadsword, and a bagpipe. Yes, you heard that right. While the Second World War was being fought around him with machine guns, tanks, and bombers, Mad Jack fought his enemies more like William Wallace from the film Braveheart. During a dangerous landing in Italy, for example, he was the first to jump out of the landing craft, played a Scottish battle song on his bagpipes, threw a grenade, and then drew his sword to charge at the enemy. In this way, he not only killed enemy soldiers one after another, but repeatedly captured huge groups of enemy troops on his own. In 1943, in Salerno, Italy, he and just one other comrade crept into a German camp at night, and he was armed only with his sword. There, he surprised a sentry and forced him with the blade at his throat to call his comrades out of the darkness one by one. The Germans followed the familiar voice of their guard and surrendered immediately when they saw the tall British officer with the sword. And so, that night, Mad Jack captured an unbelievable 42 heavily armed soldiers. Churchill understood that you can completely disorient the enemy by doing something absolutely no one expects. The next soldier on our list became the most highly decorated soldier in all of United States history in January 1945, after an action that was more than extreme. What he did sounds like something straight out of a Rambo film, even though physically the American was the complete opposite of the famous action movie character. Audie Murphy was only 1.66 meters tall and, at barely 50 kilograms, so slight that he was initially laughed at and rejected by both the Marines and the paratroopers. After several unsuccessful applications, he was finally accepted into the United States Army in 1943 at the age of 20. But Audie Murphy quickly proved that you do not have to be a big, muscular fighter to become one of the most dangerous soldiers of the Second World War. In just 2 years, he single-handedly eliminated more than 240 enemy soldiers, captured countless others, and also destroyed half a dozen tanks. But the act that would turn him into a legend took place in January 1945, in a snow-covered forest in France. Murphy's unit had been reduced to only 19 men still able to fight when, suddenly, a massive force of German infantry, accompanied by 6 tanks, rolled toward them out of the forest. Murphy ordered his men to withdraw while he stayed behind completely alone. The only thing he had left was a burning M10 tank destroyer that had been abandoned by its crew. Since the vehicle was full of ammunition and fuel, it was basically a ticking time bomb. But Murphy simply climbed onto the open deck of the burning tank destroyer, grabbed the heavy machine gun, and opened fire. Incredibly, he managed to hold off an entire German company on his own. While he killed German soldiers one after another, around 50 in total, he was also using a field telephone at the same time to coordinate attacks with his own artillery. He was hit in the leg during the fight, but kept fighting relentlessly until he ran out of ammunition. After the war, Murphy also became a Hollywood star and even played himself in the war film To Hell and Back. But until his death in a plane crash in 1971, Audie Murphy suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder for the rest of his life and slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow out of paranoia. Next comes Lyudmila Pavlichenko, who became the deadliest female sniper in the Soviet Union during the Second World War under the nickname Lady Death, even though that role was not intended for women at the time. When the Nazis attacked the Soviet Union in 1941, Lyudmila Pavlichenko was actually studying history at the University of Kyiv. Because nurses were needed at the front, the army initially wanted to assign her to that role. But Lyudmila Pavlichenko firmly refused to become a nurse and instead asked to be allowed to try serving as a sniper. Since she had a great deal of experience with rifles as a member of a shooting club, she was indeed sent to the front as a sniper. In less than a year, Pavlichenko eliminated an incredible 309 enemies in various operations, earning her the name Lady Death. She proved especially skilled in so-called counter-sniping, meaning sniper duels. Pavlichenko would often lie completely motionless in the mud for days, without eating or moving, simply waiting for the enemy sniper to make the first mistake. In those duels alone, at least 36 elite German snipers fell victim to her. After the war, she completed her history degree and then worked as a historian until her death in 1974. Because of her fame, she also became the first Soviet citizen to be received by a United States president at the White House. From this legendary sniper, we now move to the complete opposite, a German soldier who became one of the most dangerous soldiers of the Second World War because of his unbelievable close combat abilities. On the German side, there were highly specialized assault engineers whose job was to eliminate heavily fortified enemy bunker systems where ordinary infantry failed. One of them was Corporal Heinrich Schultz. Schultz was a flamethrower operator. That means he was not equipped with conventional weapons, but instead carried a flamethrower with him. Specifically, he searched for deeply buried positions under the ground where enemies were entrenched, and he began smoking them out systematically. That is how he received his nickname, the Exterminator. During his missions, in addition to the flamethrower, he also carried heavy, highly explosive tanks filled with flame oil and propellant gas on his back. Any enemy hit could have turned him into a human fireball. Since flamethrowers at the time had a range of only about 25 meters, Schultz had to crawl right up to the enemy earth bunkers through the heaviest hail of bullets. Once he got there, he fired his stream of flame through the enemy firing slits, killing or incapacitating everyone hiding inside the bunkers. In fact, a jet of flame forced under high pressure into an enclosed room burns up all the available oxygen in the room within fractions of a second. It creates a sudden pressure effect and fills the space with extremely toxic carbon monoxide. Because the enemy was so terrified of the fearless exterminator, they often fled as soon as they saw him from a distance. And that was despite the fact that, at long range, they actually had much better chances than he did. Although Heinrich Schultz was only a simple corporal, he was eventually awarded the Knight's Cross for his missions, the Wehrmacht's highest award for bravery. Finally, we come to Léo Major. The French-Canadian sniper, who became known as the Undead, is considered one of the most dangerous soldiers of the Second World War because, in April 1945, he liberated the city of Zwolle in the Netherlands almost single-handedly. That night, he slipped into the German-occupied city and, by throwing grenades and firing wildly, created the illusion of a huge Canadian force. Because the German soldiers believed they were essentially surrounded, Leo Major was able to capture dozens of them until the rest of the garrison fled. The fact that the French-Canadian managed to do this near the end of the war was only because he never gave up, no matter how terrible his situation became. In fact, Leo Major repeatedly suffered injuries that would have sent any other soldier straight into a wheelchair and back home. It all began a year earlier when a phosphorus grenade exploded right next to his face during a firefight with an SS patrol. Leo Major lost his left eye. When the doctors wanted to send him home, however, he refused and said, ice cold, that as a sniper he only needed one eye anyway. Then he kept fighting with an eye patch. In February 1945, his vehicle drove over a tank mine. Major was thrown through the air, broke his back in 3 places, and shattered both ankles. Once again, the doctors told him the war was over for him. But Leo Major escaped from the hospital as soon as he could walk again and immediately reported back to the front. Despite all of his severe injuries, the undead kept going like a zombie, and without his tireless commitment, Zwolle would probably never have been liberated with so little bloodshed.